Friends, let us drink to our fears. Let us drink to the fears of our friends and of our nation. They've returned, you see, those fears. We thought they would be gone. We thought we had nothing to fear. But we do have something to fear. Life will never let us go without fears. So maybe we should try to make them our friends. It's Sunday night, and I took a moment to surf through Facebook, and I saw a post from an old friend of mine, a young woman. She's young. For me, she'll always be a young woman. She has a big heart, really a big heart. She's like purely human. There's nothing machine in her. She can't work. She does not think kind of logically or in sense of mathematical and cause and effect. She is always seeking some kind of new age guru solution. She is pure soul, and I love her for that. And recently she's been going to peace demonstrations. And of course, peace demonstrations now, today, in the 80s, when I came to Germany, peace demonstrations were very anti-American, of course, as they still are, I'm sure. But and they were also very leftist, and they were against the Cold War, against the nuclear armaments, nuclear arms race, and the American rockets, on German soil and on the border to Russia. They wanted to get rid of those nuclear, warheads. Of course, they never mentioned or never thought about that Russia also had nuclear warheads pointed at them, but that wasn't. That's not true. That's not true. They thought about it, but they said, yeah, but what happens if someone pushes the button? Those warheads are not going to get as far as America. They're going to land here in Germany. And that was their fear. The fear that you talk to any German who grew up in the 70s and 80s, in the time of the anti-NATO, demonstrations and the so-called peace demonstrations, which were really strongly infiltrated by Russian propaganda machines, just as they are today, I'm sure. I'm sure of it. It would be nonsense. It would be crazy if that weren't the case. But they were extremely afraid. They grew up with this fear. And the fear, of course, was mixed with knowledge of their own past and guilt and a moral feeling of guilt. And so it came across as kind of a politically correct, I'm such a nice guy, virtue signaling kind of thing, holier than thou kind of thing. We want peace and the goodness for all mankind. But what they were really afraid of, But what they were really driven by was their fear that it would happen here, that the bombs would fall here. And that's the same thing today. In Germany, the peace movement has been growing stronger and stronger. And the peace movement is anti-Ukraine movement. It's a movement to end the war in the Ukraine by the Ukraine surrendering. That's how you would end the war in the Ukraine, right? That makes sense, okay? And they're saying, well, Ukraine can never win first, which may be true, and it's not worth all the bloodshed. Just give it to Russia, and I guess you could say that has a certain logic to it, because it may be true that Ukraine cannot win, and we saw that in Vietnam. We tried in Vietnam to stop the Viet Cong. We could not win that war, and eventually they won. And the price was so high. We saw that again in Afghanistan. We could not really win the war against the Taliban. And the price was high. Now the Taliban have Afghanistan again. But is that really who you want to be? it's easy for Germans to say, and for these peace-loving Germans to say, that Ukraine should just they'll live fine under Russian rule, which is also true. There's not going to be a purge, I think, or at least not a purge among maybe the political leadership. But they wouldn't live worse than the Russians do. But is that what you want to do? Is that why you just say, here's Putin? He's aggressor. His goal is to get as much land as he can, and to get as much power as he can, and to have power over as many countries and peoples as he possibly can. Do you let this guy get that power? Are you willing to let a quasi dictatorship, an aggressive warrior, a violent, greedy, absolutely self-centered quasi-dictator do what he wants, in not so much in the interest of peace, as they say, but in their own interests? Because you and I know it's not about peace. It's about they're afraid that it will come to them. The Germans are afraid that it will come to them. That's the whole of it. I think I have never. Germans often, pretend to be very, very selfless. They say, well, we have to think of all of mankind, and we want, peace for all, and there's so much suffering in the world. But they're really thinking, what if Putin gets this far and comes into Germany? I don't want to be one of those guys who were against him. I want him to think, oh, you were on my side. You get to live. I think that in the end, that's what it is, basically. And the question is, what is Putin going to do? How far will he go? If he gets the Ukraine, will he go on to Poland? And Poland is, of course, NATO. And if it's NATO, then guess what? Germany has to get involved. Germany is involved. Germany is NATO. And of course, America it will be involved much more than Germany. But it's an appeasement. It's an appeasement movement, of course. And it's appeasement out of fear. When Bush invaded either Afghanistan or Iraq, it was one big long thing. There were peace movements here too, and they said, no, you can't do that. You can't invade Iraq. And suddenly Saddam was not a vicious dictator. He was a victim of American imperialism, and it was all about the oil, of course. And around the corner here, there was someone put up a sign. These peace-loving Germans put up a huge sign across their building, or the whole face of their building. It was like it was a banner, and it said something like, you cannot. Democracy has never been founded by war. Of course, that was quasi the goal of the Iraq War, to bring democracy to Iraq. And by the way, now it's quite a few years later, and Iraq still has a democracy. It's unstable and it's young, but it's more of a democracy than it is in Russia, which is right here in Europe. So, we'll see. In 100 years, if Iraq is still a democratic country, then we have, alongside Israel, two democratic countries in the Middle East. That's a big thing. So anyway, okay. So but this banner, I loved it because it's right in front of Germany. So these Germans were really, really convinced that war as this abstract construct is so evil and bad that nothing good can ever come of it, And I'm thinking, wait a minute, this is Germany. Germany is only a democracy because America and the other allies went to war against Germany. Germans did not choose democracy. They voted for Hitler. Hitler was the most popular candidate in the elections of 1932 and 1933. They voted for him. He was their dictator of choice. They knew what they were doing. They did not want democracy. They thought democracy after the, just before the Second World War was a failed concept. They did not want it. And the only reason there is a functioning, stable democracy in Germany today is because the Americans and the Allied forces forced it on Germany. Came in with a great sacrifice of human life into a country that was not our problem. Germany, Poland, this was not an American problem. We didn't have to do this. We didn't have to sacrifice our men, our young men, and huge amounts of money to come in and solve Europe's problems. But we did it, and we forced Germany to have a stable democracy. And under that strong leadership from the Allied forces, from the Allied countries, and especially from America, Germany became a stable democracy. And it was not because of the Germans themselves. It was because of force from the outside. It's a really terrible thing to say, isn't it? But it's true. It's true. And so, these guys who are, so in love with abstract concepts like peace, they don't understand that it sometimes comes with a price, and that sometimes you have to go out and sacrifice to do it. Germans don't approve of sacrifice. They approve of prosperity, but they don't approve of sacrifice. So I think my young friend and these other Germans who are demonstrating for peace, I think they're just scared. They're afraid. And I get that, During the Iraq War, or was it earlier than that? It was before. It was Afghanistan. This was just after 9/11. I was talking to a guy in Germany, and he was so worried that America would do something, would react to this, and he said, "No, it can't. This is just terrible. If you react to it, if you try to stop Osama bin Laden or send in troops, it would just be the worst thing you could do. It would just escalate the situation." And I said, "Well, what are you talking about? You can't just let these guys do what they want." And the conversation got hotter and hotter. And finally, he said what he really thought, what the whole reason behind his reasoning was, what he really felt was. He said, "What if it happens here?" And that was the core of his fear. It wasn't about, the 3,000 lives that have been lost in a terrorist act. It wasn't about the people, the Taliban and all these guys were just torturing and dictatorships and unfreedom and human cruelty. It wasn't about any of that. It was about what if it happens to us? What if these guys come here? What if there's a terror act here? If we Germans don't do anything, maybe they won't notice that we're here, and they'll just concentrate on America, and America will be the enemy, and we'll just be able to continue, having this great life we have and prosperity and security. There was a time after after the fall of the wall, 1989, when Fukuyama, of course, said the end of history, and I really thought a new era had dawned, and that you could live in peace and security, and it was such a wonderful feeling. And I think a lot of people since then have grown up in this assumption that the prosperity we have, this peace and security that we have, all we got to do is get a job, basically. We don't even have to do that. We have to, just get on Social Security or whatever, or our parents. And, we can, and it's fine. We can sit around in the beer gardens all day. It's a sunny day outside, by the way. I would like to go out to a beer garden. Anyway, and just enjoy life. And then suddenly something happens where we realize it's not. We don't not live in peace and security. This is just us, and it's just an illusion. 9/11 happens. Tiananmen Square happens. Russia invades the Ukraine, right in the middle of Europe. And you realize it's not. We actually have to be afraid at all times that all of this could go down the tubes. And I get that, I understand that fear. The Chancellor of Germany, the reason I know about this is she mentioned it in her little post. The Chancellor of Germany commented on these peace demonstrations, and he said these are fallen angels who live in hell because they are speaking the script of an aggressor. Which is true, of a warmonger, which is true, and he called them fallen angels and agents of hell. But you don't say that as a politician. You don't insult the people who are worried and afraid, because when you insult them, just like in America, just like the right in America, they double down. And they think it's, what I'm saying is right, and these guys hate me, and they're attacking me. I'm being attacked. It's not just that I have a different opinion; it's I'm being attacked, and that's true. So I expect a rise in war demonstrations in Germany, and I expect. I think it's the possibility it's a good possibility that there will be a some kind of real political crisis in Germany in the foreseeable future. The more this war goes on, I think. And I also feel. I do feel for her. It would be so much better to live without fears and worries. And a lot of it is spiritual fear. It's, when I look at America, right and left, it's maybe fueled by media. And it's true, I believe absolutely that the woke culture is a neo-fascist culture, basically. It divides people into identity groups and takes away their individuality and pits one group against the other. That's fascism. But there's also a fear behind it. On the right, there's a fear that, not that they will have their rights taken away, because they're in a safe place. They're in Florida. DeSantis will protect them from wokeism. They're not going to, their rights will not be taken away. Their children will not be mutilated by, woke gender proselyters. But it's a fear that everything that made this country great is being discarded and dumped in the trash. And I got to tell you, I feel that fear too. I feel it too. I feel like when people say, free speech is good, but only not with people who disagree with me, they should not be allowed to speak. That is a fascist idea and not an American idea. That is going into the direction of destroying everything that made America great. And of course it's on the other side too. The right is very much just as rabid and aggressive as left, and comes, I think, partly from a place of fear, but it's not a place of personal fear. It's a fear of that our world will be destroyed, will be lost. The greatness that is America, and it really is. You look at history, it's the greatest country ever invented. For plenty of reasons. If you ever want to fight about it, I can fight about it. I know the reasons, and they're all true. And it could be lost. It can all be lost. All of it. Empires fall. Ideas are corrupted. Democracies disappear. It's not written in stone. Everything we think, is just standard, basic. It's here because it has to be here. It's natural that it's here. We could lose that tomorrow. It could all go. I keep coming back again and again to these dinner table discussions with my father. And it was the 70s, there was hippies and the long hairs and all this. He was a conservative guy. I'm sure he voted for Nixon, and he would have voted for Trump if he'd been alive for Trump. So he was definitely conservative. But we were, rebellious kids. And I admired my big brother, who was kind of half a hippie maybe. And they would discuss this. And my father's position was, this whole hippie thing is a sign of decadence. We are losing the strength of conviction to fight for our ideals, because all we want is the pleasure and the rewards of having won the battle, but we do not want to go into the battle again. And my father, of course, he fought in 2 wars. He fought the real fascists, the Nazis, not just the fake fascists, bunch of fascists, the Antifa running, kids running around, that's all fun, one game. But he went up against the Nazis with a gun, and he pulled the trigger. That's a different thing altogether. And he went up against the communists. He was in Korea, and and that was real. And I didn't listen to him then, because I thought, he's just an old guy. This is the new. I want the new. I was young. I wanted the new world, the future. That was my. And of course, that's true. Every kid wants, to be the young generation, because he is a young generation. That's perfectly fine. But now, looking at it, looking back, 89, the wall falls. We're supposed to be living in paradise, and then comes Tiananmen Square. September 11th, Putin marches into the Ukraine, and it's this old wisdom comes back. And Dad says, if you can't stand up for what you have, you will lose it. Someone out there will come and try to take it away. And if you're not willing to fight for it, he'll get it. You will just lose it. If you can't stand up for what you have, it will be taken from you. I think that's true. It's just true. And so here we stand, here we are, and we're it's not just this generation, the Gen Z, I guess, the Gen Z, it's not, the pronoun generation and that TikTok generation. It started with us. It started with us. Maybe even my older brother, the hippie generation, the 86 generation, the 68 generation. The Germans called the 68 generation. They switched the 8 and the 6. Growing up in prosperity, not understanding what struggle is. And all they wanted to do was enjoy the prosperity and not be bothered with things like, war and real evil, which is always there. And so they, devised theories and abstractions and relativities that would kind of explain away the evil, that it's not really that evil, and they're just like us, all Russians, love their children too, which is true, but that wasn't the point. That wasn't what we're talking about. That was a distraction of what actually is going on, and even with that generation, but with my generation and that time, starting from that time, we were weak, privileged, overprivileged. We spent all our creative and intellectual energy on justifying, just privilege, justifying moral privilege, justifying material privilege, justifying superficial ideals and superficial desires. And then we were like little mice, we're looking out the door now and looking at the Ukraine, and we don't know, is this going to be Vietnam? Because that's the thing. That's the axe, the Damoclean sword hanging above our heads. Is this going to be another Vietnam? What happens when Putin gets the Ukraine and he keeps marching and he crosses the border into Poland? Then there are going to be boots on the ground. There may be boots on the ground even before them. And let me tell you, my friends, they're not going to be German boots. They're not going to be Italian boots. They're not going to be Dutch boots. The Europeans will do a little bit. They'll do a minimum. But it's the Americans who are going to do the heavy lifting. Again, we're doing it already. It's already started. It's if you look at any chart of how much contributions have been made to Ukraine to defend Ukraine against Putin by country, there's a long line up top, and it's the USA with, I think, $70 billion in military aid, humanitarian aid, political aid, etc. All the kinds of aid. $70 billion USA. And under that, then there's like with $35 billion, the EU. The EU is on the border to the Ukraine. The Ukraine is on the border to Poland, and that's the EU. So this war is happening on the border of the EU, but they only contribute half of what's being contributed that the US does. Half. And then you look further in the EU itself. How much is Germany, the richest country in the EU, and the second richest country in the Western world, and the fifth richest country in the entire world? How much are they contributing? They're contributing a tenth of what the USA is contributing, like 70 billion or something like that. A tenth. If this becomes another Vietnam, if there are boots on the ground, as they say, it's going to be American boots. It's going to be, my nieces and nephews, or no, not nieces and nephews at this point, the grandnieces and nephews. It's already, they're even my nieces and nephews are too old now. But the grandnieces and nephews, they're going to be the ones. They're going to be out there fighting a war that it's not for them. And and it's not an American war. This is on the border to the EU. It's not on the border to California. We are not impacted by this at all. We don't need to have anything to do with this. But just by the fact that the EU is helpless and not willing to stand up for itself, we have to jump in and do their work for them. And so here we stand, here we sit, here we cower. Our little hovels, our little mouse hovels. We're looking out our little mouse door, and out there we realize once again it's a world of cats. Don't get me wrong, I like cats, but I wouldn't want to be the mouse. But now we are. And we're scared, man. And I get that. I'm scared too. I'm scared in practical ways that have nothing to do with with Ukraine or any politics. I'm scared of things like, I may not be able to pay the rent in a couple of months. I may not, where's my income coming from? I don't have a pension. I don't have a retirement plan. What's going to happen if I don't, get the great book before I die? Am I going to end up in some kind of rat-infested little, government housing for the old or something? Those are real worries and real fears. But then there's this spiritual fear that, America is too weak to offend itself, that America will throw out its own values, that America or the Western world or democracy would rather sacrifice their own values than stand up for them. And then it's just over. And it's not just Putin. It's, this woke flirtation with fascism. It's all that. And that scares the daylights out of me. And so when these guys, my little, cute little new age girlfriend goes out in the streets and demonstrates for peace, meaning demonstrates in favor of Putin and against the Ukraine, and trying to get the Ukraine to surrender, so the Germans won't be as afraid as they are. They don't have to fear as much as they fear now. I get it. I understand her. She's afraid, and we're all afraid. And we dream of a world of security and prosperity where there is no reason and no need to be afraid, but the real world will not go away. And so let us drink, my friends, to fear, to our fears that will not go away, to the fears that come from within and come from without, to the fears that are a part of life, just like going to work every day and trying to get a paycheck, to the true fears, the real fears that we're going to, in our lifetimes, fall into a world of real crisis and violence and desperation. I'm sorry it has to be this way. I'm sorry for all of us. But life doesn't care about what we want, does it? It does what it wants. Here's to our fears, the fears of our friends and the fears of our nation. Whether we agree with them or not, whether we like them or not, we all share the same fears and we all understand the same fears. We're all afraid. And this connects us all. Good night.